It's a Blessing for Presence by John O'Donohue. May you awaken to the mystery of being here and enter the quiet immensity of your own presence. May you have joy and peace in the temple of your senses. May you receive great encouragement when new frontiers beckon. May you respond to the call of your gift and find the courage to follow its path. May the flame of anger free you from falsity. May warmth of heart keep your presence aflame and anxiety never linger about you. May your outer dignity mirror an inner dignity of soul. May you take time to celebrate the quiet miracles that seek no attention. May you be consoled in the secret symmetry of your soul. May you experience each day as a sacred gift woven around the heart of wonder.
Welcome to In Her Image, a podcast where we seek and celebrate our Mother God through scripture, scholarship, and the arts. I'm your host, Meg Ritmanek, and today I'm going to be interviewing Niki Dewart and Elizabeth Marglin, the authors of the Mother's Wisdom deck and the Wild and Sacred Feminine deck. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. I would really love for both of you to kind of share your individual journeys to enlightenment and then kind of how you came together to make these two different decks. And so let's go ahead and start there. Elizabeth, would you mind sharing first kind of your path to enlightenment and coming to know the feminine divine?
Sure. There's something about the term enlightenment that sets up a opposite of unenlightened. So then, am I there yet? So I wouldn't call it a journey to enlightenment because then it's more of a revealing what's already here. Well, my family modeled a kind of success in the world, but also a kind of unhappiness. And I think so from a very early age, I was wanting a different path. I think that was really early. And then in college, I started studying Eastern religion, and I spent 8 years in India. And then that really cemented that kind of other way of being in the world. And I was with a teacher, and then there was a whole process of reintegration and unraveling when I came back to this country at age 30, not being very world savvy in terms of how the world works, how to drive, how to function. And then in the last 10 years, sort of had another round of deep spiritual interest as my marriage was unraveling and sort of reclaiming of my life as I moved into my 50s and that middle passage. So it was a circuitous route. I'm still on it, but that's the short story.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And Niki, how about you? What does your path look like?
I guess probably sort of a seeds planted in childhood. Also, I was raised Unitarian, which is kind of a very liberal, like spiritual community. Really, I mean, a lot of our founding fathers, and there are many roots of Unitarianism in our country. But for me, what it was just an opportunity to explore. So like in 6th grade, for our religious studies, we studied all the different religions. So we went to synagogue, we went to Buddhist ceremonies, we went to Catholic masses. Like we really kind of touched on everything to just know and experience what all the different paths were. And I really love that. And so I think that kind of stayed with me as I got into college, and I took a lot of courses in anthropology and religious studies, and I ended up majoring in art history because there was so much of everything that I love that kind of lived there, along with images and beauty. And so I would say that the unifying thread for me is often beauty, which for me has a much bigger meaning than just like the surface of how something looks. That too is important, but just how much beauty there is in our world, and beauty in language, and beauty in the natural world, beauty that we carry as humans, a sense of sort of harmony, but then also discord can create beauty. So I stayed on my path in art history and ended up in Amsterdam in my young adulthood, and just kind of through my love of art started encountering a lot of art and spirituality. So those two things got fused even more, and ended up going to graduate school and studying ritual, which was very multidisciplinary study of art history and drama and religious studies. And then found that many ways I came up against an edge in academia where I couldn't really get to where I wanted to go because it stayed so much in the head. And so then I left and moved to California and ended up working a lot with rites of passage, both nature-based rites of passage, like out on the land, doing vision fast work, doing rites of passage for youth. And that kind of, as I grew older and further along on my path, turned into rites of passage for mothers. And I think just a real love of understanding all of these thresholds that we cross as humans. And so when I landed in motherhood, I found that it was like, took me to my knees. And Elizabeth and I connected around that time and had this shared desire to offer some tools for women who found themselves similarly in that place with motherhood. And for many of us, we were stepping outside of spiritual practices because we just didn't have time to do yoga and to meditate. And we were used to things looking one way. And then we found ourselves really consumed by what it was like to juggle all the elements that kind of are on one's plate when you are stepping into motherhood. And we kind of had the idea that if we could create a deck that would help women recognize that motherhood in and of itself is a spiritual path, not one that's particularly recognized in our culture and not celebrated, but certainly important for us to see the type of personal growth and depth that could be cultivated while caring for others, that would be really meaningful. And so that was the first deck that we created, the Mother's Wisdom deck. And then this new deck, the Wild and Sacred Feminine deck, sort of grew out of that, of the Mother's Wisdom deck. There was an invitation to take that and then expand it to be more universally accessible to all women and all people identifying in any way, because the feminine lives within all of us.
Exactly. I love that. I actually have your Mother's Wisdom deck. I am a lucky person to have it because from what I understand, it's not in print anymore. Is that correct? Okay. My friend works in birth work and was gifted one by two different people as she was doing birth work. And she gifted one of them to me for my birthday. And it actually sits on my bedside table, and I use it frequently, and I love pulling it out. My kids actually love pulling it out and picking cards for me and then having me read it to them. And it's truly beautiful. And I'm sure that your new deck is amazing as well. But I can truly speak to the Mother's Wisdom deck because it has influenced my life quite significantly. And I love it so much. I was actually pulling cards this morning and reading different things, and it helped inspire some things that I know I need to work on and brought up some things for me. So I love using it. And, but I want you guys to speak to your new deck and kind of why you called it the Wild and the Sacred Feminine. And because I feel like those are two very different things. They're kind of at odds with each other, right? Or at least a lot of people view it that way. So tell me more about the name of that deck.
Well, it's interesting that you feel they're at odds, because I know what you mean. They don't necessarily fall in together, but we feel like they sort of complement. But in our exploration of the qualities, it was started out as the sacred. We just felt that was too static for a feminine deck, because though the way masculine and feminine throughout history, how the feminine's been diminished and the masculine has been put as the sort of abstract, unmoving, transcendent figure of God, and the feminine, the body. We wanted to say she's both, and she's the sacred, but she's fluid, dynamic, shifting, edgy, always reinventing, always becoming. So that sacred is sort of that unchanging essence that we come in with, and in a way we return to. But along the way,
Our divine self. Oh, I was just saying, like, the divine part of ourselves, right?
But the wild also is that divine way that life will shape you, the way a river is shaped by her environment, and a river is shaped. So we just thought it wasn't complete to have it. Yeah, and Niki can add more, but it just felt too static and contained for the just to have the sacred. It needed to have a kind of movement to it, which we call it wild.
Yeah. Well, can I speak to that for just a minute? And then I would love to hear your ideas, Niki, as well. But most of our listeners are from like Christian background. And there's this idea that like we need to be perfect, even like God is perfect. And the translation of that word, the original word was teleos, which means to be complete or whole or entire. If you look at like the path that Christ went down, it was for him to be an anthropos, which means to be fully human. And that perspective of going through a human journey opened his eyes and allowed him to fully connect with others and then also be fully divine. And we all have that within ourselves to experience this humanness and all of the hard things that happen as a human, and also experience our full divinity. And that is what makes us complete and whole and entire. And if we like see that scripture as not perfect, but as like complete and whole and entire, then we're able to acknowledge that our humanness is actually what's bringing us to that completeness. And so I love that you have combined this like wild and sacred feminine, because we have to acknowledge that both sides are what make us divine and bring us to our completeness. And so anyway, Niki, you, I know, would love to speak to that as well. So if you could give your input on like why you felt like that was important to include in the deck.
Yeah, I mean, I so appreciate what you were sharing. And I think that a lot of what we ended up exploring, when we were asked to do this Sacred Feminine deck, it felt daunting because it's such a huge topic. And I think in our inquiry and deep listening, Elizabeth and I began to recognize kind of like these qualities, like what is that sacred feminine? And there was, as Elizabeth was saying, sort of that eternal quality, that just immense and timeless, and like it is so kind of quality of the sacred, which I think is kind of like along the lines of that divine feminine that you're speaking to, or the divinity within each of us. And what we also recognize, and I think we can all acknowledge in ourselves, and it does come through the humanity, but I think it also comes through just being embodied in form in this earth realm, right? Whether it's an animal or it's, looking at a tree, there's this idea of wholeness coming through embracing things as they are, and as they are always changing. And so what we recognized in the feminine is that it's not always perfect. Rarely, is it such that like the feminine doesn't really want to be put in a box, and that word perfection kind of, at least in me, brings up this feeling of being defined and like having to fulfill a certain role. If we're talking about like our divine self, that's one kind of perfection. But I think sometimes that gets kind of put on us as women, feeling like we have to be one way in order to be acceptable. But then in reality, when the feminine is in her full power, she's not always, she can be messy and she's not always pretty. And so we wanted that quality of that unruly wisdom that doesn't want to be put in a box, doesn't want to be tamed, doesn't want to be defined. And we grew to recognize how important that is so that we can become something that we have not yet been seen in ourselves or been told about, but that we can really be attuned to what is being asked of us to become more of. And I would say, like you were naming, that is when we're stepping into our wholeness, when we're embracing all those parts of ourselves. And along those lines, in this deck, we really worked a lot with the shadow, because we felt that the wholeness in the feminine, and I would say in all humans, really comes from both the light and the shadow, and that oftentimes our wisdom and our greatest insight can come through the places that we're not as comfortable looking at, the things that kind of like hide out where we're not paying attention. And so if we can befriend the shadow and befriend those things that maybe aren't as socially acceptable, or that maybe we were told are not okay, that we can actually find there a lot of jewels that we can then integrate. And in integrating them, we do really step into our wholeness and in our full power. So I would say that the wild kind of opens the door for all of that, and really for the deck to become more of that space for wholeness to arrive.
Absolutely. And I believe that the Creator made opposition in all things, and that opposition is what makes life beautiful and is what propels us forward and makes it so that we can learn and grow and become more like God. And without it, I don't think we would be able to make the progress that we need in this life. And so I love that you have focused on the shadow, because for generations, we have tried to stuff the shadow down and not acknowledge the shadow and how important the shadow. And I think it's stopped our progression as like humanity to really take that next leap into our evolution of like our sacred evolution, I guess I could say. So today I asked you both to come on and share a story of a specific goddess, because we're doing a season of storytelling. And so you mentioned that you would love to talk about Bridget, and I was excited about that because I actually have Irish heritage. And so tell me about Bridget and how maybe your background with her, like the story of Bridget.
Great. Well, I can begin. I was sort of inspired. I just got back from Ireland, so Bridget is sort of alive in me, but I, kind of got to know her maybe personally. Elizabeth has her own journey with Bridget, maybe 25 years ago in Ireland, and visiting Kildare, which is where the eternal flame, Bridget's flame, is kept alight by a Brigadine order. And I was just fascinated by her for many reasons. And I thought maybe we would start today by I'm going to read the entry about Bridget that we wrote, that's in the deck, just because I think it's a great opportunity to get to know kind of what this deck is about and kind of what the invitation is. And so Bridget there are 4 suits in this deck, the Wild and Sacred Feminine deck. There's the wild suit, which are animals. There's the elemental suit, which is like tree and ocean and star and threshold and things that kind of live in that elemental realm. Then we have archetypes. So that's where you would find mother and priestess and shapeshifter and crone and, different archetypal forms of the feminine, and then the goddesses. And so there are 13 cards in each suit. And when we were kind of casting our net wide, we really wanted to include goddesses and archetypes in each of the suits that were not just from one culture. But the goddesses were particularly challenging because there are so many amazing goddesses. And so we really paid attention to who showed up and wanted to play with us. And Bridget was one of the goddesses that really showed up. And I would say my experience of her is she's kind of like the mother goddess the Celtic mother goddess. Like she definitely has this amazing role in both the Celtic world, but she has been bridged into like the Christian, more recent past. But she really has a foot in both of these and these really ancient roots. And in Ireland, when I was there, they just made a national holiday for Bridget. So she is that important. Like there's St. Patrick, which we all think of when we think of Ireland. And now there's like Bridget's Day. And so like the curiosity of what is so enticing about Bridget and why is she so alive and well as a goddess? And maybe that's why she really wanted to show up, because I think she speaks to a lot of women, not just people of Irish descent, but because she has this amazing ability to bridge and this longevity, like she has endured. And so I'm going to begin by reading. And Bridget, she is the hearth card in the deck, and her shadow is gloom. And with each of the cards, we open with a quote or a piece of a poem or an excerpt from a reading that we found really powerful. And this was a way that Elizabeth and I found to include as many voices as possible in the deck. And the quote by, in this case, is by Lamar Wilson. And it says, "Make of this hollowed hearth in my chest a pulsing womb, an isthmus to anywhere." So we're kind of focusing in this card on the heart as the hearth and that internal flame. So this is the entry for Bridget. Hailing from the mythic Tuatha De Danann people of Ireland, Gaelic goddess Bridget stokes the fires of healing and smithing, as well as prophetic and poetic inspiration. She is the heart of the sacred hearth. Born at dawn and true to the meaning of her name, she who rises, Bridget didn't go underground when Christianity arrived in Ireland, but lives on through custom and legend in the guise of Saint Bridget of Kildare. For centuries, priestesses and nuns have tended her eternal flame at the ancient temple of Kildare. Bridget's flame burns within you as well. Drawing her card is a call to become the holy fire keeper of your internal hearth. After any dark night or bleak winter, the fire of sunrise and spring is a welcome blessing, bestowing warmth and arousing possibility. Traditionally, Bridget spins her magic at Invoke, a Celtic fire festival that coincides with the awakening of the earth in early spring and heralds the quickening of new life. Yet she appears as needed and invites you to summon her any time you need to rekindle your inner light. The fire in the belly is an energy center, a cauldron simmering inside, brewing vitality, strength, and passion. Beware the melancholy that can descend when you dampen these flames by denying your flares and fervors. Raise yourself from bouts of gloom, says Bridget, by fanning the embers of your most ardent aspirations. When in doubt, follow your body, your felt sense of what rouses your enthusiasm. With your soul fire alight, Bridget initiates you into the mysteries of the bright hearth. Here you can hold vigil for anything, hope, bravery, gusto, that needs to emerge from forgotten ashes. The element of fire moves you to experience the presence of the eternal flame, the divinity within that cannot be extinguished. A well-tended hearth is a sacred heart, a core of red-hot embers that ignites again and again the ever-living light of your incandescent soul.
Oh, and I really want to read the Bridget excerpt from the Mother's Wisdom deck. Would that be okay? Okay, so Bridget is peace, and her shadow is conflict in the Mother's Wisdom deck. And here's what it says. Bridget is a goddess for our time, an enduring divine mother celebrated for gifts of poetry, magic, healing, and apropos for a confrontational world, peacemaking. Daughter of Dinah, the mother of the goddess of the mystic Irish tribe, Bridget married an enemy and bore a son who eventually perished in battle between the warring tribes. Having suffered this unbearable loss of her child to the westlands of war, Bridget became practiced in diplomacy. She has since sent countless ripples of peace into the world. Today, Bridget encourages you, beseeches you to live your life in widening circles of peace. When peace lives in your heart, it can spread to those in your inner circle. From there, it will radiate outwards into the world. Mothers hold the seeds of a homegrown peace movement. Surrounded by sticks and stones and broken bones, not to mention sibling rivalry, peacemaking is at the crux of motherhood. The possibility of peace dwells in every moment. Bridget hovers over each brouhaha, waiting to land. Whether you are sipping a cup of tea or kissing a child goodnight, peace rises from the enjoyment of your presence. You can share it with a smile, and everyone benefits. When you are full of inner conflict, hatred, and anger, those feelings spill out into your home and beyond. Practice filling your heart with compassion that can transform your suffering and allow you to sit in the name of peace. World peace can be that simple. It begins with you. When Christianity arrived in Ireland, the Celtic Bridget did not go underground, but continued to do her work under the guise of Saint Bridget of Kildare. Legend tells how Saint Bridget gave her father's sword to a poor man so that he might sell it to feed his children. United by our love for children and a commitment to their welfare, we mothers are similarly powerful advocates for peace. When her son was killed, Bridget, self-stricken, gave rise to the tradition of the Irish keen, a powerful vocal lament. How can you fully embody your voice to declare peace? Whether by using nonviolent communication in your home, teaching conflict resolution at a neighborhood school, or sending prayers for peace to the other side of the globe. Bridget, meaning the one who rises, asks you to rise above the daily fray, to take stand with the power of love. Be the peace you want to see in the world.
So Bridget is, we're just about to Samhain, or the Celtic New Year, which coincides with Halloween. And Bridget's time is really the next cross-quarter holiday in the Celtic wheel of the year. It happens on Candlemas or Imbolc on February 1st. And Bridget, I'm going to just share a little more broadly her story and where she came from in Celtic tradition, and then what happened as she moved into being a Christian saint. So Bridget is part of the Tuatha, and that was the kind of from the Celtic time in Ireland. This was the divine beings. And she was sort of a land goddess. She was the daughter of the father god, and she married someone from the enemy tribe. And so she's seen in that as being a peacekeeper. And she is also someone that's sort of an advocate for the tribe and for the people. And I think that's part of the reason why she was so popular. She's not specific to Ireland. That's sort of her Gaelic roots, but she's also down into Scotland and Britannia overall. But I'm going to speak mostly to her in Ireland. And she had a son, and he was killed in battle eventually. And so her wailing and her grieving also gave rise to the tradition of keening in Ireland, which is that vocalizing lament that has been passed down. So that's a really important part of the expressiveness of the feminine and the power of the feminine and of grief in Irish culture. So she is also the root of that. And then her name, and as we mentioned in the card, means she who rises. And that has to do with that energy at Imbolc in the spring. So we're heading into the part of the year where dark reigns over night, or dark reigns over day. So we have more hours of night in the day. And that starts to, that balance starts to tip at Imbolc. And Imbolc is where we kind of have the first energy of the earth stirring. So the fire and the warmth of the earth rises, but then also the sunlight begins to warm. And so the fire of the heavens begins to be amplified as well. And that brings about the warming that is necessary for a new cycle of growth. So she's not the spring, like Easter goddess. She's really before that. And this is when the milk comes in to the animals, like the sheep. And then there's also that quickening of the belly. So the idea of the new life in the belly. So she's really that first seed of light and of life that is planted in the spring. So that's one sense of her name, She Who Rises. But she is also associated with anything rising, specifically fire, which is that warming, but also water that rises from wells. And she is associated with holy wells throughout Ireland as well. And one of the things that I was exploring when I was in Ireland recently was that when the Tuatha left Ireland, or they didn't really leave. They said, you can have, they turned over to the Celts, you can have the land, but we will forever remain on the land, in the trees, in the wells. And so that's one of the reasons why trees and wells are so sacred in Ireland. And Bridget is associated with trees. The Kildare site where she is still revered is originally at the site of a sacred oak tree that has all kinds of mythology around it. And then there are many, many wells around Kildare, as well as an eternal flame. So she kind of has all these things going on. And she also has the association with, she's sort of like a triple goddess. So there's Bridget, and then Bridget had two sisters. So Bridget has these associations with wells and fire. And then she has a sister who was a healer and an herbalist, and she worked with midwives. And then she has another sister who worked with the fire of the forge. And then Bridget herself, along with sort of Druidic tradition, one of the really important aspects that blends poetry and prophecy. One of the classes of being a Druid had that kind of combination of poetry and divine inspiration. And so that's Bridget's aspect as well. So each of these, the poetic, prophetic, the healer, herbalist, midwife, and the forge, all have to do with fire. And those are her sisters, but really they're three faces of one goddess. She's a triple goddess. And so these are different aspects of wholeness, of the feminine. And she has that thread of fire throughout. So in the prophetic and poetic, you have the fire in the head, they call it, which is that inspiration. And that's kind of what we were exploring in this card. But so she's that divine fire in the sense of our inspiration, but then she's also the hearth and the healing and the protection and the midwifery and all of that sort of internal physical hearth, but then also the hearth, the fire of the forge. So she has all these different aspects of fire, which I think is really beautiful. And at the site, in ancient times, before St. Bridget, that eternal fire was kept by 20 women, and they would each tend the flame one night. And then on the 20th night, they have these 19 or 20 goddesses or priestesses. And on the 20th night, Bridget would tend it herself. Mm-hmm. So there's this long tradition, and that lasted really right up through like the 16th century, when it was extinguished, when there was just a wave of suppressing Catholicism in Ireland. And there, in the early 90s, a group of nuns got together and relit it. And now that same fire in the same spot is being tended, not the same flame, but that fire is being tended for Bridget even today. And you can go to Kildare and you can do a pilgrimage there to her wells, and you can visit the flame. And it's a really touching to me that there was this bridge from this goddess into this saint. And she was around the 5th century, and they don't really know much about who she was as a woman, but probably she was actually someone that even before she became Christian was a priestess or some sort of a religious leader among her people, and that she was associated so strongly with the goddess that she was being revered as Bridget herself. And then she started this saint tradition in Ireland around the saint. And then what is fascinating to me, and this happens so much in the Christian world, but the local traditions that really had a lot of power, the Christian church assimilated them. And Bridget is well known as being one of those saints that really the same traits that were hers as a goddess exist as hers as a saint. So they are pretty much one and the same. She bridged from goddess into being a saint. And so she's really revered today in the same character and with the same attributes as she was as a goddess in, pre-Christian Celtic times, and then all the way through the Middle Ages into today.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that information. So you kind of sparked my curiosity with just the season that we're going into right now, and how is she tied to that season? Because it feels like the fire is going out, right? So how is she tied to that season?
The season we're heading into? Yeah. So Bridget, because she's a land goddess, just means she's always present. And there is a story, though, that in this time of year, she is imprisoned in a mountain. And depending on if you're in Scotland or you're in Ireland, the mountain changes. But she's imprisoned in that mountain by the Cayley, or the hag, and that then she's freed by Angus, her divine lover, in the spring, and that's when Imbolc comes. And another version, she is the hag, and she moves, and I kind of like this version better myself, but she moves into this aspect of that inward turning, sort of crone age, where we kind of focus our energy not on outward production, but more on like what's churning inside. And the invitation for this time of year is to kind of go within. And so she's going into the mountain, she's going into the womb and regenerating herself in that place. And so that's kind of the vision that I hold, and what the earth is doing right now. And Bridget is a land goddess. And then what we as women can also be doing this time of year is we're going within, and we're really generating sort of that deep inner warmth, whether it's through poetry or inner reflection, or sitting by the hearth and telling stories like you're having on the podcast right now. But what is happening in the dark time of this year that doesn't happen when we're all so busy out, in traditionally growing things or planting seeds of new projects or harvesting, that's a much more outward energy than the inward energy of the Cayley. Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out. I love that. So Elizabeth, tell me your experience with Bridget and your background with her.
I have a sort of newfound appreciation for her as a poet goddess. But one thing, as I was, learning more about her when we were creating the deck and stuff, is that she's a goddess of contradictions and contains all. Like, she's so much around the hearth and home and protection, but then also the passion of pursuing whatever it is that makes you whole. So she's balancing a kind of this, as Niki was explaining so beautiful, different types of fire, fire of protection, fire of inspiration, fire of finding what lights us up in contemporary language. But as the goddess of poetry, I really appreciate, and I love that Niki spoke of the way prophecy and poetry are connected, that in the depths of speaking truth in the form of a poem, there's a way that the poetry and poetry represents a type of knowing that prophecy also does. And I didn't quite know until Niki was explaining that how linked those two were, but I love that idea that poetry is a form of prophecy and vice versa. So I appreciate that about Bridget, a patron saint of poets. And when we close, I actually was looking for a poem that would sort of tap into that feeling of Bridget, which was hard to find, but I landed on a poem by John O'Donoghue, who was a priest in Ireland, and at least they share that Gaelic background. And even though he's male, the masculine and what we love about the feminine is that polarizations and binaries get absorbed in her huge capacity to hold. So other times we've talked about how we all carry feminine and masculine within us. So the idea that, I mean, because he's a male doesn't exclude him from this wild and sacred feminine tribe.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I do love that idea of that we all have those masculine traits and feminine traits, and it's a matter of like balancing them and bringing them together. There's a scripture in the Gospel of Thomas that talks about bringing balance and balancing the masculine and the feminine, and how that will be like your entry into the kingdom of God, and how that's been interpreted in so many different ways. But I think the most beautiful interpretation of it is that as we bring balance, it brings this wholeness or completeness to us. And being able to look at these 3 different flames and thinking about them in my own life right now and how I could apply them to my own life, right? So for the last year and a half, I've been attending an art academy, and I have full intentions of becoming like a professional artist. But the last few months, I've just felt very stressed and overwhelmed. And I have been reflecting on that and trying to figure out what do I need right now for myself. And as you were talking about like sitting at the hearth and hearing the stories and just like letting that burn inside of you, that's really resonating with me. Like I can see that that is the stage that I need to move into right now. I need to turn inward, and I need to rest and rejuvenate myself and sit with my family and friends and just soak in beautiful stories and help my soul kind of replenish. And then that fire of inspiration, I just think about when I've really received something that I feel is so directly from God, it really does feel like fire inside my body, you know? It's like a physical sensation of fire. And then the fire of the forge, which is this fire of creation and going out and actually making something. And I love all of that. I also think it's very interesting that almost every goddess that we dive into has this aspect of descent into, like with Inanna and the underworld, or with Bridget and like going into the cave, and that you have to go into this part of your life where you are reflecting, you are picking through maybe the shadow and trying to learn lessons from the shadow, and this balance of the opposition and of the light and the darkness, and how both of those can serve us and help us to continually step further up on our path as we're going through life. And so I love that she ties to all of that, and I feel inspired right now to kind of look at a lot of those traditions that are held with Irish, that legacy and history, and see how I can incorporate that in my own family, because I just have this burning desire in my life right now to connect to my ancestors and to bring some of those traditions into my own home and practice them. And so I'm excited to look into that holiday and see what kinds of things maybe we can do and celebrate that with my own family, and talk about Bridget with my children and different things. So thank you for sparking that within me today.
The beautiful Bridget's cross you make weaving grasses. I don't know if you have an image for that. It's kind of at a slant, sort of off, but it's and you can weave, you can tie it, and then it's sort of like a protection, and you put it up on invoke, and then you burn it during Samhain. Suan?
I'm not.
I think you let it go back into the fire at a certain point in the wheel, but that is a nice craft to do around invoke, is making a Bridget's cross.
Oh, yes. I have seen those beautiful weavings before with the grass and different things. That's a great idea. Thank you for sharing that. Um, so we typically like to end our podcast by asking people, how has the divine feminine influenced your life and helped you?
I can share just what's coming to me is an interesting, like, how has the divine feminine impacted my life? And I think that as I've gotten more deeply into understanding what the divine feminine or the sacred feminine is, there's not such that separation. I think there's sort of this embodiment of the divine feminine or the sacred feminine, and really allowing that to live through me and as me. And it's really elevated my life in the sense that I think that so much of our world has been shaped by the masculine over the last several thousand years, and that underlying that is this deep strength and magic and beauty and creativity of the feminine. And I think that knowing more about the divine feminine in all her faces has allowed me to recognize how alive she is in our world. And so I just feel like I see her everywhere, and then have the opportunity in recognizing the divine feminine, like as I'm out on a walk, or as I'm talking to somebody, or as I'm looking at artwork, or experiencing my life and enjoying my family, like recognizing that, then I can sort of recognize it in myself. And I think it's given me just a lot of inspiration, and it's almost like courage to know what kind of a well we have to draw from, that we're not alone in experiencing these things ourselves, but we have like just so much majesty within us. And it's not just in the form of a masculine, but that it really, there's so much of the feminine. And as women, we have this amazing opportunity to get to know that within ourselves and presence it in the world. And I feel, in terms of, like you were saying, the when we can really blend the masculine and the feminine in ourselves, and I feel like likewise in the world, when we can really balance the masculine and the feminine in the world, that is so important to our healing, where we're at as a species and on our planet right now. So there's a real desire that I have to kind of help bring the feminine more into the conversation, so that everyone has the opportunity to find that balance.
Yeah, I have that burning within me as well. That's why we do this podcast, is to help bring that forth more. And then also, I'd love to speak to kind of how you were talking about the divine feminine in every culture. You can find her everywhere. And as a mother, I just think about my own experience and how I would never want to leave my children, right? Like I would always want to be there for them. And so if we're speaking of the divine feminine in a mother type scenario, she is there with all of her children all over the world in every tradition. She's never abandoned us, and she's always been here for us. And I love how every tradition has taken her and embodied her in these beautiful characteristics, such as the flame of Bridget, and that eternal flame that burns within us and can help tend to our souls and help inspire us and help us to then become creators ourselves. So that's really what I feel like I've pulled away from this podcast today, and I really appreciate you sharing. But Elizabeth, how about you? How has the divine feminine influenced and
No, I was
inspired
going to
your life?
answer that, but I just want to add, with the divine feminine in across all over the world, is that she does have that tending, nurturing, mothering aspect. But I appreciate, for example, in Hinduism with Kali Ma, that she is fierce and fearsome, and she is cutting off heads, and that love can be that fierce. and cutting through illusion, embracing death, the fact of death as a timekeeper on our lives and a way of also cutting through illusion. So I think, yes, the Divine Mother as nurturing and holding, but also cutting through and terrifying.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely. And I am super excited to have an episode about Kali. We have not yet. But the fact that, like, in order for rebirth to happen, some things have to die in our life, right? And that is what she's all about, is this idea of, like, we've got to kill some things that are not serving you in your life. Like, let's let them die. And that takes a certain amount of bravery and fierceness to be able to face those things that are holding you back.
Right. And just to allow the full range of potential for women, that it can be holding things close, but it can also be rage, not just not wanton raging, but purposeful, intentional rage.
Yeah. I think the name is sacred rage, right? That rage that creates change. And coming from a Christian background, we even see that rage that Christ displayed while he was in the temple, turning over the tables. He displayed rage because something needed to change in that moment, to be able to make that place a sacred, holy place instead of like a place of money or a place of the world. So I feel like rage is actually a sacred thing that can move us towards our sanctification, if that makes sense. So,
and often a part of motherhood that's often not talked about, but is there too, to just move things through. But in terms of the divine, like, how has the divine and sacred feminine touched through our lives? Like I said, I wasn't sure what answer would come, but listening to Niki, I think, and I don't want to say what she said, but something opened up and made me realize that the female friendships that I have created and leaned on through most of my life, particularly intense around being a mother with young children and being in a marriage that didn't meet so many of my needs. But even before that, I had women's circles and friendship circles, but the company of women, and Niki and I have been in a women's group and then writing circles. I think that the company of women has such an openness, a bodiness, a delightfulness, a vulnerability. I hold women gathering together as sacred. I think it allows such a beautiful expression of that divine and of the world energy that we can switch from talking about, I don't know, things of the world back right into the womb of what really matters. So, and not to say that deep and transformative conversation can't take place across genders, but there's an allowing when women are together. There's some kind of alchemy in that environment that I feel is very potent.
I want to kind of expand on that, because in a lot of ancient goddess traditions, there were priestesses that gathered together and created this female community. And that has been stripped from modern day practices across most traditions. But I feel like we are reclaiming that, and it's bringing healing to this generation to be able to gather as women in community and support each other and love each other. It's bringing the healing, I feel like, from the goddess and helping us live in our power again. But it's not this individual power, it's this community love. It is so incredible to be able to gather as women. And I think it's absolutely essential in healing our world. We hear about all these horrible, tragic things happening, mostly due to mental health issues. And when we get to the core of those mental health issues, it's because we're not living in community. We're not gathering together. We're not truly knowing each other soul to soul. And as women start doing this, and if it expands across the world, I mean, it will change the world, right? And so it is so important. And I love that you made that point, because I feel like there has been a huge feminine awakening of the divine over the last years. And a huge part of that is these gatherings of women coming together and just sharing love with one another and supporting one another in community. And I see it as the work of the goddess on this earth, and helping to heal this earth. So thank you for sharing that.
I wanted to say one thing kind of tied into this gathering of women.
Yeah.
And I don't know if your listeners are users of decks, but one of the reasons I would say that the deck came into being, and also one of our favorite ways of using it, is to have a deck. And this deck is a beautiful way for your listeners to connect with the sacred feminine. But, if you have a group of women gathered and each woman draws a card, sets an intention and draws a card, and then the depth of sharing that comes from that card, like how that card speaks to them in their life and what's challenging for them in the moment, what they're working towards in their lives, like it just kind of takes the conversation in a whole different direction that allows that kind of vulnerability and empowerment in community that you were speaking to. So if that is an inspiration to anybody, I feel like it is part of the healing work that we're hoping the deck can support.
I love that. And we actually probably should take a minute, because we didn't really have a chance to go over decks and their uses at the beginning when we were kind of introducing the whole idea. First off, I want to say like how I use a deck, because some people may feel hesitant. Some of our listeners may feel hesitant using a deck. I personally, when I am seeking divine inspiration, I feel like it can come from anywhere, as long as I am having the intention of seeking that. And so I personally, when I am needing that, I ask, what do I need today? Do I need to read in my mother's wisdom deck, or do I need to listen to a podcast? And I always distinctly hear guidance of what I need. It may be to like read an actual scripture, but I feel like inspiration can come to us in multiple ways and across the board. And so, how would someone receive that divine inspiration through your deck that you have right now? Like, what's some ways they could do that?
I mean, I think in a way, just expanding on what you said, approaching with reverence and genuine openness, and then questions like you are saying, what do I need today? Is it a podcast? Is it a deck? But if you've decided on a deck and you're wondering what question to bring to the deck, I mean, one of the most beautiful and simplest requests is to just say, show me what I need to see, show me what I'm not seeing, show me guidance. But even just those two words, show me, is like a very humble way of entering.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful expression of faith, right? To say, like, I want to hear you in my life right now, and I'm going to display faith that you will show me, that you will come into my life right now and show me something that I need. And for me, it's always a very tender experience. I always feel like God is there, a part of my life, interacting with me one-on-one, and it becomes so sacred. And so I always appreciate being able to have that interaction, and I highly encourage others to do that. And I think that inspired decks like yours are great ways to have that interaction with the divine. So I really appreciate the effort that you guys have all taken to create the deck. Maybe you could touch on the point of how you were inspired to create the deck, or what external forces you felt like came in as you guys were creating it.
Yeah, I think that one of the kind of guiding principles of the deck, both in creating it and using it, is just, as you were speaking to, like that faith, like the deep belief and, in a sense, of knowing that we have the divine within us, and we live with the divine all around us. So there's this opportunity for a deep intimacy. And so the deck, you can approach it with that in mind, and to know that when you draw a card, and the message that is coming to you when you first look at the card is really coming from your own knowing within. And so it's not exclusively coming through what we wrote about a card. Say if you drew the Bridget card, it's not specifically from the passage that we wrote, but first and foremost, it's coming from within, and from what you know, and from what you draw inspiration from in your life. And so maybe a card makes you think of something you encountered, maybe a dream, or maybe someone you ran into on the street in a conversation you had, or maybe something you read, or a podcast you listened to. Like, all these things start to weave together. And the card can kind of serve as that thread to begin to make sense of all the relationships that we are always embedded within, and the conversation that we have available to us with the divine at any time. And I think that in writing the deck, similarly, we really wanted, because we're the Elizabeth and I are the co-authors, and then there's an artist who did beautiful imagery that is such a huge part of the deck. Her name's Jenny Kostecki Shaw, and she's from Taos, New Mexico. And in writing the passages, like I shared with you about Bridget, we're trying to just stir the pot and kind of get things moving inside. And maybe there's a question that we pose that deepens your own personal inquiry, and maybe something is a new awareness that hasn't really come to you before. And so there's lots of possibilities about how to engage with that. And in writing those passages, Elizabeth and I engaged in the same process. We kind of said, work with us. Like, that we really invoke the sacred feminine, like show up to us, work with us, work through us. And then we really just paid attention, because if you take a card like the Mother card, there are volumes we could have written about Mother. So how could we know what was most important and most relevant to be shared in this deck? And we just listened, and we paid attention, and we drew upon our own experiences and our studies. But really, in that moment of writing, we just tried to be as clear a channel as possible, and to get out of the way so something else could come through us. So I think that's really how we saw our role. And like Elizabeth was saying, sort of that poetic, prophetic, that we can be in communication, and that knowing, whether you call it intuition or insight or inspiration, that we all have the possibility of being in that space and receiving those insights and knowings as we move through our lives.
That's beautiful. And I really do think that that is the best way to write and inspire text that can influence and help others, is with that intention of trying to channel the divine through that text. And so I'm sure that our Divine Mother is grateful that you took the time to do that, and to help all those that are seeking her and seeking to understand her. So I really appreciate that. Elizabeth, how about you? Is there something else you wanted to say? You kind of just...
I was just going to add, I think Niki covered it, but that it's a way of making meaning. It's almost like a little handmade machine for meaning making, because there's nothing worse in a way than not having any faith at all. Whatever the faith is, it sort of supports the idea that there's meaning in our lives and meaning in the events that happen to us. Without any kind of faith, we're left with the idea that things are random, chaotic, coincidental, like no through line. And so when you tap into meaning, be it the meaning of a period of time, the meaning of a day, the meaning of a season, it's bolstering it. It makes us feel we're here for a reason. That someone in a book I was reading said, someone set us down here for a reason. Hopefully they'll pick us up too. But so that's also what implied in using a deck is a way of affirming meaning.
Absolutely. And I will just add to that, like my own personal testimony, that I believe the divine does want to help us make meaning of our lives and is invested in our individual journeys and wants to help guide us and nurture us and lift us as we go through our experiences. I know I have personally experienced that, and it's been just as real as me having a conversation with you, having those interactions with the divine. And so my personal testimony is that is important to them. Thank you both so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you. Where can our listeners
probably the easiest place is your local bookstore or Amazon. We like to support the local bookstores if possible. And if they don't have it, you can ask them to order it, but it is available in all major sort of online retail outlets.
And Shambhala too, Shambhala Publications or Shambhala Press, Shambhala.com. They can find it if people don't want to support Amazon, which we understand.
Perfect. Well, I will put the links into Shambhala Publishing so that people can find it there. And then if they want to explore other ways to purchase it, they can do that as well. And we are so grateful that you guys took the time to come on our podcast today and sending you blessings and all the great things from our Divine Mother. And
thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, and such beautiful questions.
Season with your family, sitting by the hearth, telling stories. So, thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this inspiring episode. Feel free to share it, and if you haven't yet, please leave us a review. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can make a monthly donation at anchor.fm/inherimage. Tune in next Sunday for another inspiring